Thank you very much, Lucas. Everything you said is true. And I'm glad you mentioned Emily Wilson because she's in the very first sentence of the foreword for this year's Best American Poetry. And it's a pleasure to be here on an evening devoted to the best American poetry, past and present. We celebrate our history, which goes back to 1988, 38 annual volumes, plus 2 best of the best retrospective collections, and a reprint of the initial volume in the series in 2018. So there are 41 books. At the same time, we meet here to launch the Best American Poetry 2025, edited by Terrance Winch. Reading for us will be poets whose work appears in this year's volume, as well as the guest editors of 2 recent volumes, Mary Jo Salter, who picked the poems for BAP 2024, and Elaine Equi, who did the honors for our 2023 book. It is altogether fitting that our venue is the 92nd Street Y, in view of its wonderfully rich literary heritage. Cynthia Ozick recollects listening enraptured to W.H. Auden in this space. It was, she writes, a kind of shrine, the grand oaken hall, the distant stage, and its hallowed lectern, the enchanted voices with their variegated intonations, the rapt listeners scarcely breathing, the storied walls themselves in trance. This was the poetry center of the 92nd Street Y in the heart of the 20th century. For the greater part of our history, Scribner has been our publisher, and this, too, is cause for jubilation. For Scribner's contributions to our literary culture have been many and great. Scribner had already published Henry James and Edith Wharton when legendary editor Maxwell Perkins appeared on the scene and converted Scott Fitzgerald's manuscript, The Romantic Egoist, into This Side of Paradise. What followed was The Great Gatsby, The Sun Also Rises, Ring Lardner, Nathaniel West, James Jones's From Here to Eternity. What isn't as well known is that Scribner published the poet Robert Creeley's very first book of poems, For Love, in 1962. Creeley, the guest editor of the Best American Poetry 2002, could make a poem out of the spoken language irrespective of content, as in A Wicker Basket. Here are 2 quick stanzas. Out the door, the street like a night, any night, and no one in sight. But then, well, there she is, old friend Liz, and she opens the door of her Cadillac. I step in back, and we're gone. She turns me on. To Scribner, its editors, publicists, and designers, I owe great thanks, not only I, but American poets in general. For the achievement of the best American poetry is that we have promoted poets, made them feel validated and valued, given them an audience, joined them with their peers and mentors. We have initiated readers into the mysteries of poetry, and we have introduced to a wider public the most prominent poets of our time. To Mark Bibbins, himself an accomplished poet, who has worked with me behind the scenes since 1997, I owe a huge debt of gratitude for doing brilliantly the tasks of a managing editor, which range from skillful copy editing and eagle-eye proofreading to keeping track of nomadic contributors and assembling their poems, notes, and comments, and doing so with ideal diplomacy, which is very much needed when you deal with poets. To the absent Terrance Winch, I wish you were here to hear me thank you and praise you for your editorial acumen and your own genius as a poet. Terrance has written something for this occasion that Matthew Rohrer will read a little later. I'll also read a poem by Terrance, along with a poem of mine that John Ashbery chose for the initial volume in the series. For every volume of the Best American Poetry, I have written a foreword, and I think it will give you a flavor of our enterprise if I read excerpts from a few of these forewords, a few now and a few when I conclude our program. This is from the foreword to the Best American Poetry 2009. I forgot to ask whether you can hear me. Can you see me? That's great because I cannot see you. The light is blinding with the brilliance of our poetry. From the foreword of Best American Poetry 2009, what is a poet? Kierkegaard, in a passage I've long admired, in his book Either Or, identifies the poet as one whose heart is full of anguish, but whose lips transform all sighs and groans into beautiful music. Kierkegaard likens the fate of this unhappy individual to the cruel and unusual punishment meted out by the tyrant Phalaris, whose unfortunate victims, slowly roasted by a gentle fire in a huge copper bowl, let out shrieks that turn into sweet melodies by the time they reach the tyrant's ears. The success of the poet, then, corresponds to the amount of agony endured. Readers clamor for more, for they are aware only of the music and not of the suffering that went into it. And here, Kierkegaard's parable acquires an extra layer of irony, the better to convey his contempt for critics. Why, to be sure, he writes, a critic resembles a poet as one pea another, the only difference being that he has no anguish in his heart and no music on his lips. And therefore, Kierkegaard concludes with a flourish, sooner would he be a swineherd understood by the swine than a poet misunderstood by men. For the foreword of 2010, over the years, I've read novels centering on lawyers, doctors, diplomats, teachers, financiers, even car salesmen and dentists. But not until 2009 did I come across one about the travails of the editor of a poetry anthology. When word of the anthologist, Nicholson Baker's novel, reached me last September, I couldn't wait to read it. Baker's novels defy convention and reveal an obsessive nature, and I wondered what he would make of American poetry, for surely his novel would reflect a strenuous engagement with the art. The editor of the anthology in his novel needs to write a foreword, but cannot. He has undergone a writer's block. How many people read introductions to poetry anthologies anyway, he wonders, then volunteers, I do, but I'm not normal. Having asked myself the same question and given a similar answer, I can appreciate the speaker's troubling awareness of the many poets who have to be left out of his book and the relatively few people who will bother to read his introductory essay. But the editor makes several very astute comments, and his advice to aspiring poets is, and I quote, "Don't postpone writing the poem," he says. "Put it down, work on it, finish it. If you don't get on it now, somebody else will do something similar, and when you crack open next year's Best American Poetry and see it under somebody else's name, you'll hate yourself." In 2015, I wrote, the willingness to button up our lips does nothing to deter such shocking assaults on free expression as the homicidal attack on the editors, staff, and cartoonists of Charlie Hebdo in Paris on January 7th, 2015. The satirical weekly that held nothing sacred, not even Charles de Gaulle, exists within a French tradition of caustic satire, brazen caricature, and principled impertinence. It has waged a war of wits with the forces of militant Islam, mocking Sharia, religious rule based on ancient Muslim principles, unmodified by anything resembling a Reformation, an Enlightenment, or an ecumenical council. The editors of Charlie Hebdo, including the legendary figures known as Sharb and Kabou, were among the 12 individuals killed in the attack of January 7th. For the right to say what they thought, they paid with their lives. On the very night that the Paris massacre dominated the news waves, with Parisians in the streets holding up signs saying, "Je suis Charlie," I heard a New York Times columnist go on CNN and tell newscaster Don Lemon that we in journalism should try to avoid giving offense. This struck me as a very odd thing for him to say. Isn't giving offense, provoking discussion, stirring the pot, airing your views, part of the deal? A former press secretary to President Obama drew a distinction to the effect that while the press has the right to insult a religious leader, it may show bad judgment to wave a red flag in the eye of a stampeding bull. This is too half-hearted a defense of the freedom of speech and press, both of them under constant assault. In contrast, consider what Sharb said, paraphrasing a line sometimes attributed to Emiliano Zapata, hero of the Mexican Revolution. I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. Now, I'm going to skip the brilliant excerpts from the 2017 and 2018 volume because it is my pleasure to introduce the first of the poets represented in this year's volume. Patricia Davis Muffet will read her own poem, plus the poem Terrance chose by the recently deceased Martha Solano. Each poet will introduce the next poet. And here is Patricia. There she is.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. So for more than 30 years, I have had a front row seat to the climate crisis as I have watched my husband, Carol Muffet, and his tireless work for environmental justice. So this poem is an outgrowth of that experience. Climate anxiety. I have always said I'm the person you want sitting next to you when the plane goes down. The truth is, though, how could I know? Yes, I have been on a plane when hurricane winds pulled it from the flight path, when plastic cups seemed to levitate, when flight attendants lay flat in the aisles holding metal posts under the seats. I have spun on black ice. I have faced 5 lanes of oncoming traffic. I have sat in the ICU as my father faded, kept my head clear as the doctors spun complicated phrases into the whir and blink of machines. What I'm saying is, I have grounds for my declaration. Plus, I have stayed next to you all these long 3 decades as you tracked Arctic sea ice, as you considered what it means to be a people after your land is swallowed up, through amicus briefs and protests, placing yourself between the precipice and the coming plunge. What I mean is, I have kept the lights on, made the stew, stocked the pantry, born and raised children. I have made you laugh, held my hand to your cheek as you fought against despair, even knowing what you know. I have kissed your temple as we lost altitude, all the snacks and liquids swirling like nebulae in these weightless, impossible moments before it all comes crashing down. And I have the honor of reading this poem by Martha Solano, who we lost earlier this year to ALS. Marty was an endlessly inventive poet, and this poem came out of her experiments with an anagram maker. So this is called When I Learn Catastrophically by Martha Solano. When I learn catastrophically is an anagram for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. When I learn, I probably have a couple years, maybe catastrophically less. Crossword puzzles begin to feel meaningless, though not the pair of mergansers, not the red cardinal of my heart. The sky does all sorts of marvelously uncatastrophic things that winter. I shimmy between science and song, between widgeons and windows, weather and the invitation to walk. Walking, which becomes my lose less, my less morsels, my lose smile, while more sore looms. Sometimes I wander for hours, my mile pace over half an hour, everyone passing the lady at dusk, talking to herself about looming rooms, soil lies, or ire and else. Chuckling about my mileage gone down the toilet, I plant the rose of before, the oil of after. As each breath elevates to miracle, I become both more and less of who I've been, increasingly less concerned about the dishes in the sink, more worried about the words in my notebooks, all those unfinished poems. I remember the fear of getting lost if I left the main trail. I remember molehills, actual molehills, piles of salty roe, mountains of limes. Catastrophically, it's rare, 1 in 500,000. But then I learned the odds of being born, 1 in 42 billion, though not sure how they calculate, or the chances of the cosmos having just the right amount of force to not break apart. Less smiles, more lose, miser miles. A sis and bro whom I'll leave like a sinking island, Ferdinandia, that submerged volcano in Sicily, though let's be real, I was more pen mole than lava, more a looming annoyance than a bridge to some continent. I'd wanted to be composted, but it would cost $9K to convert me to dirt. So I opted for whatever was easiest to carry across state lines. Some of me beside my mother and father, bits of me on San Juan Island, at Jekyll's Lagoon and Seward Park, where I'd wandered like a morose remorse, a loreless reel, a miser silo, a doddering crow. Thank you. And this is Greg Delanty, sorry.
Thank you. I was going to tell you anyway. Thank you. Excuse me. The first poem of the two poems I'll read is called Tell Me Something Good by Margaret Atwood. It's on page 6. It's a poem about our times, no doubt. Tell me something good. just one good thing. Just tell me something that will get me through the hours, the days, the weeks that bring nothing of any goodness. Just more news of other things like spoilt meat or else raw bones the dogs keep dragging in from God knows where. What bombed out car or ocean wreck? Whose child's ribs wrenched open? What woman's torso torn like bread? Whose son's now headless? What trashed home, what oily sludge 100 miles wide on which we feed? The walls pour in, the door won't close. Oh, stop, go mute. Just one good thing instead is all I ask. So let's say green buds. Or wait, there aren't a lot of those. Just one green bud might do, despite. No, wait. Let's say a person said hello and not unkindly. No. Let's say that it got cooler or else warmer, or the rain finished, or else it rained, whichever one was needed. No. Instead, say, breakfast. That could do it. A faint shimmering of plates and pearly spoons, a tender cup. What comfort there. That's 30 minutes past at any rate. The gate defended for a little space. And wasn't that enough? No. Wait. And it's very hard for people to lift poems off the airwaves if you don't know the poems. But the other poem I'm going to read is my own. It's a kind of litany, prayer to my cancer. The cancer was supposed to be, hopefully, a slow cancer, but it wasn't. Not so slow. It is from a sequence of poems for and to my own cancer, a book entitled The Chorus, the Cancer Chorus. This poem, like the others in the sequence, are in what is called the Noism or Noist address, where I speak to myself and my cancer in the plural, the royal we, etc. Do you know? At a recent reading of the poem, someone in the audience laughed aloud and said afterwards that they felt bad. They apologized. I told her, not at all. It is partly humorous, the poem. Humor is the refuge of a desperate man. And besides, I'm free now of the cancer, so all good. And I got a book out of it and a poem. And thank you, for New York Review of Books, for publishing it, and for me to be in this, and for David, and for Terrance, and everybody. Thank you. To our indolent cancer. It's about 16 lines. It's a mouthful. I'm not sure I'll get through it fully without stumbling. To our indolent cancer. Or lazy, or listless, or lovely, or lingering, languid turtle, mooching, smooching, slow dancer, dozy, dossing, easygoing, foot dragger, tinkering, plodding, procrastinator, incipient necromancer, lackadaisical, lackluster, loafing, lagging, lug, watched pot, Féan to féans, Dios, slug, or brick-taking, Ozident, artisan, slacker, or unfussed, watching the grass grow, dawdler, or most phlegmatic, sloth, maundering, moony, loony, manatee, nonplussed, relaxed, dilatory, shell-slumbering snail, or aesthetic, asthenic, torpid, tortoise, lumbering, Laodicean, dilly-dally-ing, desultory, lollygagger, or shilly, shally, or dear, there, where, cancer, hair or lullaby. You can, sir. Be kind. Be gentle. Be easy. No need to rush. We still have loads, bags, oodles of time. Remember, I die, you die. We're both here now. Why the sudden push? Thank you. Sorry, Jana Ferman, excuse me.
Hi. Not kidding about the light. So this poem from the recent BAP was originally, or no, I guess not original. Yeah, sort of. It was in the Georgia Review, but it's also in a book called Data Mine, which is all prose poems about the internet. How to change the filter on the developing cell matter in your womb. If you wake up early, the genre is rom-com. The cells trade insults with a grad student waitress with dimples. If you microwave your frozen Pop-Tart, it's sci-fi. An alien beams up a fertilized egg so they can kibutz about time travel. If you double the shots in your Americano, action. A fetus drives a McLaren 7205 into an amniotic sac. If you choose to go to bed, maybe mumblecore. You keep adjusting the womb's speaker, but still you can't make out. If you read the New York Times on your cell phone, it's clearly an Oscar winner. The sibling of the disabled fetus learns how to hide his tears at the truck stop's cervix. If you read the back of the cereal box, it's a documentary. A talking head explains why the fetus isn't kicking. If you throw the cereal box against the wall, French New Wave. The fetus's naked ass complicates the meta-dialogue about the commercialization of Hollywood film. If you wear red lipstick under your KN94, a musical is born. In glittery feathers, the mother's bladder tap dances. The thin hairs on the fetus sway together, Bugsy Berkeley style, forming an arch, then spiraling into numerous rhinestone-adorned spokes. If you cry in the driver's seat of your minivan, melodrama strikes. Once the fetus falls in love, his deadly illness is detected. If you text your ex an inscrutable emoji, oh, the horror. The fetus attacks the host with dissonant chords. If you take a selfie with your childhood stuffy, Studio Ghibli, the fetus morphs into a cat-shaped balloon and floats out of the womb. If you walk to work It's a costume drama. Each style of chapeau suggests a new stage in the fetus's psychological development. If you skip work, it's film noir. It was all the dame's scheme. There never was a fetus in the womb. I'm going to also read this poem that was in the 2023 Best American. It's called 330 College Avenue. After she dies, your mother moves back into your childhood home. Neither of you has lived there for 35 years, but the birdhouse nightlight still lights up the dark of your childhood bedroom. And in the living room, the tiger flower sofa still blooms. Here, there is another you. Still a young child, she dances alone to scratchy records while her parents dial the rotary phone or put away groceries upstairs. The woman who was once your mother is no longer your mother. Is there another mother who has always lived in this house? Has she always been here, digging holes for crocus bulbs or sorting papers at her desk in the den? The other mother, the one who never left your childhood home, was never your mother. The you who still lives there, the you who still sleeps with her binoculars under her pillow, she is not you. As your mother walks by the mirror in your childhood home, you see yourself within the gold frame. You are the age she was the minute before she died. Your glasses reflect clouds in the shape of a word. It's a language neither of you understand. In the sunlight, on a cruise ship on the other side of the earth, a mother is wearing a locket she never found a picture to fill. Or she's sitting in the backyard of your childhood home smoking a cigarette, though when she was alive, she only smoked in the car in the garage with all the doors open. In kindergarten, you wrote a picture book called The Motherness of Mothers. At 6 years old, you didn't care that motherness was not a real word or a real world. Neither did your mother. Thank you. Next up is Henry Israel.
"38 years, David, that's an incredible accomplishment and really something to be applauded. And for 38 years, I've been, every September, I'm excited to get my copy. And I never imagined I would actually be in it and be here today. So this poem's called Escape Artists, and it was published in Massachusetts Review. Who remembers Tony Curtis as Harry Houdini immersing himself upside down into a tank of water in a straitjacket with a bundle of chains wrapped around his chest, only to emerge mere minutes later to take a bow? The trick was there was no trick, just skill and a hidden key. In his mouth, I think, although my memory of it is hazy. My father had to cover himself in leaves and snow to blend into the forest grounds, which was his bed for over a year. His uncle once lay dead, still beneath a plank under a bale of hay in his Polish girlfriend's barn, and when the bayonet pierced his shoulder through straw and board, kept completely silent. What Jew hasn't at one time or another had to become an escape artist? Harry Houdini, born Eric Weiss, son of Rabbi Meir Wise,
years later dropped the Z to sound less Jewish upon coming to America from Budapest. Bernard Schwartz vanished behind Tony Curtis and starred in over 100 films, including Houdini in 1953, which ends with Harry pulled from a water tank, dying from ruptured appendix, promising his wife, "If there's any way, I'll come back," because even he couldn't disappear forever. And let's welcome Brian Genet to read his poem from Best American.
Hello. As the DEI hire in the room, I will read my poem. The heart has many rooms, doors that open, doors that don't, still a lock to pick, a key to find or borrow or have carved by the right smith. Some doors only open when another shuts, some never open. The locks red with rust and glazed with spiders' webs. Sometimes I think I want no doors, only arches or windows you have to scramble through when no one's watching. You might think it was, but it's not a storage space, neither holding cell nor jail. You have to let the light come and go as it pleases. The heart can't be bought or owned. It's terribly difficult, but not impossible to lose. Sweet friend, I found a room inside my heart I think could suit you, a place I hope you will return. You can turn the fire on or leave it cool. You can shut the shades or leave them open. Write your poems on the wall or only lie on the floor dreaming. Thank you. I just want to say my heart desires a free Palestine and to introduce Padraig Otuma.
Thank you very much. This poem is called Do You Believe in God? And I want to thank Danusha Lamiris for selecting it for Alaska Quarterly Review, and to thank Terrance and David and Lucas as well, everybody, for all of this. I'm interested in the question. I'm uninterested in a yes or no reply to it. I suppose I'm interested in tangible responses to an abstract question. Do you believe in God? I accepted it for far too long, lay down, said yes, said anything you want, said I'll follow. I took that path, learned all the rules. I was told I was a natural. I begged graces from you. It ended with a word. What word? I don't remember. Some voice said, here's a map, drive off it. When do I come back? I asked. You don't, it said. Here's a road, a sleeping bag, a stove, a little bit to eat, it said, and a night of stars. A fox along the border, a buzzard in the sky, a hare whose speed you'll need. Here's more grief and sorrow and a book and a number for a friend. Leave tomorrow. I tried anything I could get my hands on. I dreamt of different endings. I paused instead of searching for a way. I found nothing. And nothing never felt so good. I return sometimes. Sometimes I like it. I like the smells, the psalms, the bells for prayer at midday and at 6, the feeling of the beads between my fingers, the touch of skin to lips when someone puts a story in my mouth. And I'd like to introduce, thank you. I'd like to introduce Jana Prikryl.
for all these decades of work and this sort of alternate history of our times. I'm glad to be included in this last collection. This poem is on the longer side, I apologize. It's a kind of dramatic monologue that sort of hovers between my voice and the voice of Cordelia in King Lear. It's called The Channel. I think all you need to know is that it begins at the moment when Cordelia and her husband France have returned across the channel to begin the war against her sisters, but that conflict has not yet begun. Through mildewed windshield of the bridge, my France and I can see the cliffs begin to show the more as night approaches. Particulates that dim the glass release what glows to warmer glowing. In-betweens like this we had at every stage, and neither had to tell the other the light falling is rising. We double-checked the list of things to do. Together made a plan to steer some beaches west of Dover, land in darkness, darkness in that century, a toothed beast that we will yoke, march our men back east, and there, when he remembered in the middle of our planning, as if planning freed him to remember something left imperfect, like the stove on or the bathroom light, which imports so much fear and danger, his personal return was most required and necessary. It has been asked, know you no reason the King of France so suddenly is gone back? The matter made explicit, proxy for my own repeated asking, though some assume that France remained in France when I sailed north, neglecting the small wrinkle in the fabric. He came along, and then he turned around, which may be worse. I tell myself it is a privilege to hear my thoughts run out against my will, and few events on earth can bring you here, the very rim, where who you are goes on into the sheer new time and voyages without you, since you watch her go become the parting of the two, the air between. His self-awareness must have taken forms quite painful. Recently, eating an apple, the thought, like stop-motion innocence, ripened all at once in me that he ate apples, and for a moment the inside of my mouth was his. Last night it dawned on me, he slept and nearly laughed. If he slept, he woke, he experienced morning. The list is long of human things we almost did together, the man I'd bring my famous cruxes to, though I'm afraid I know what he would say. Rewrite, rewrite. Humans are the animals with speech who let all of his manuscripts go poof. It's wrong to make so personal a mind so free, you say, but as he said of overdoing things, it's fine for me. France's lifeboat going down, I stood, looking like myself, to starboard best I could, at him till he had melted from the smallness of a gnat to air, and then have turned mine eye and wept, alone now, in the plural sense of leading men, whose leader never speaks, Monsieur Lafare. They're joking over their pints, and I nearly expire, unused to marching, although 19, and they on into middle age, a sort of bonding drill beside a pub by a canal. I hear again the cut of Hazel's laugh when someone asked my plan at university. Take English, learn everything, I said, quite literally. Perhaps the only one who heard me right, Lafare's transplanted English wife who'd seen some victories and knew what they were worth. She laughed without much kindness in her voice, which did make me see myself as the child I was. I smiled, every inch aware how simple, yet meant it more for that, to read the landscape fore and aft, to read what's not, the streams up to their sources and the roads just hearsay in the place where I was born, a distant bell, as though a small neglect could be repaired, as if understanding made up for failure to experience, as if failure itself were a deeper form of experience. And there we stood at dawn, Monsieur Lafare and I, half-heartedly suppressing what we knew the other knew. A croft of trees advanced from down the hill. A flight of ravens circled overhead. We read the signals as two readers will. Interpretations so intrinsically equivocal when there is only one thing you can do. Who can tell me how event touches on the next event? What substance forms the point of contact? Where connects, enlarges every time you read the text, when I remember certain books I haven't and now wish I had, despite their dullness, thoughtless English, drafty construction, and had to ask, my captain, taste, the ear, my sense of what is good, could it be a style of selfishness permitting me to use the shipping lanes the careless use, who think about themselves from first to last? And next is Matthew Rohrer. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for having me, David. Thank you for having me, and congratulations on an incredible run of this great series. As David mentioned, I'm going to begin with comments by the editor of this issue, Terrance Winch. So this is now Terrance talking. Good evening, everyone. I wish I could be there tonight. I'd love to see the old friends who are on hand, and I was looking forward to meeting everyone I don't know personally. I'm fine, but I've had some medical issues that preclude my traveling for another week or two. I was looking back recently through Nicholson Baker's fabulous 2009 novel, The Anthologist, in which weirdly my name appears. At one point early in the book, the title character and narrator says, if we could just stop for 1 year, if everybody could stop publishing their poems, no more, stop it. Just everyone, every poet, just stop. I felt that sentiment more than once in 2024 as I wrestled with the multitude of journals coming through my front door's mail slot, along with the links to a host of online publications turning up in my email inbox. I also pondered the most memorable utterance of the late Pope Francis. Who am I to judge? Excellent question, Your Holiness. But I had said yes to the job that David Lehman recruited me for, and I soon started looking forward to all these poems taking over my life. I even accepted, while apologizing to the gods, having to pass judgment upon them. And I think that the 75 poems in this anthology, including Catherine Barnett's homage to none other than Nicholson Baker, are all works of literary brilliance. I want to thank David not only for his collaborative spirit, enduring patience, and road-tested guidance in helping me assemble Best American Poetry 2025, but also for the awesome work he has done over the past 40 years as poet, critic, editor, and anthologist. No one has contributed more to the advancement of American poetry than David. Though he is stepping down as series editor for Best American Poetry, his accomplishments will stay with us for as long as people care about great writing. Swan Song, Curtain Call, or by any other name at all, even so, we know that we have not seen the last of you. So this is my poem from this issue. It is called Nature Poem About Flowers. Looking back at photographs, our clothes were enormous, draped across our shoulders, hanging low off our hips like they were someone else's, and they were usually someone's old flannel. It is clear we didn't care or that we had different goals for our clothes. I remember one night at the National Arts Club, B seemed truly shocked. He said, "I always pegged you as a kind of a bohemian, but look at you in that suit." It wasn't unexpected. I drifted through the reading, nursing some very old wounds, acting like I was paying attention. There was somewhere else I was dreaming about, the dappled and shifting light of a forest in a book, where the air was cool and smelled like imaginary flowers. And then we were applauding, and outside on the sidewalk, the city trembled and glowed, and we all felt it beckon when F pulled a purple chunk of opium from his vest. At the bottom of tall streets at Union Square, a flowery veil descended. This was when the city would wink at us like it liked us, or I thought approved of us. And when we went to the movies, the actors were dressed like us. And one night, it was the night before I quit a lousy job, I had to get up and walk it off. And when I looked down at my clothes under a streetlight, I saw they were all brown, everything I was wearing. And I heard the phrase, glad rags, said by someone else inside my head. But also, I remembered the grown-ups used to talk under their breath about one of the older kids, how there was something wrong with him. It was obvious because he only wore brown. And the elders nodded yes. The elders nodded wisely. And I guess I didn't care because all in brown, I stepped out into the avenue where spring sounded its high notes and the blue air was perfumed by all the flowering trees that people who don't live here don't believe in, the dogwoods, the red buds, magnolias. And I sneezed, and the avenue was lit up like the deck of a ship. In the morning, I would quit my demeaning job. But first, where the electricity flowed unimpeded, I too wished to flow in my glad rags through the streets of flowering night. And when I returned home, all the rooms were dark, and S seemed asleep. I quietly slipped out of my enormous, shapeless clothes and opened an ancient book, trying once again, but without success, to live inside it, never coming out except at night, to finally persuade S that we could survive that way, that we could live forever inside of books. And she said she could agree to part-time. And I said, fine. And we both returned to the dreamy dark that surrounds us, but that we don't share with anyone. And I dreamed I quit my job by waving a sunflower at my boss who had no power over the natural world. And when I woke up, I thought, that's not a dream, that's just true. Thank you. I've got, I also, too, am going to read a poem that appeared in the 2023 Best American Poetry. It begins sadly with a loss by Michigan to Ohio State. But I want to just point out that that has not happened for more than 2,000 days. It's called Follow Them. Heartbroken over a football game, autumn evening, of this kind of thing, I'm not ashamed, nor of the twistiness of that diction, or wanting America to burn, though only certain parts deserve to die. Its forests are beautiful and have done nothing wrong. Even the desert's emptiness is beautiful, though it terrifies me. And tacos and kebabs wrapped up in naan. And today, walking through the park, I turned to see dozens of bright white seagulls flocked on the windy lake against the blue sky. And I felt an ache, and I sent a text to a friend. I said, today I saw flocked on the lake white seagulls. It was beautiful. He wrote, follow them. It was too late. Two quick things more for you. My heart, too, desires a free Palestine. And next, I have the pleasure of introducing a man who I once was convinced at a party was the amazing Criswell, but in fact is the amazing Tony Toll.
That's what happens when you get older. Everything falls down. Thank you. I have two relatively short. Yes, I confess. I did. The lights. I don't know if it's FSB or CIA. I last read here 55 years ago, and it's good to be back. Thank you. Birthdays. I wonder if Fernando Pessoa, when he wrote to William Butler Yeats for advice on establishing a national poetry for Portugal, realized that they had the same birthday. And if he had known, would that have persuaded him to actually send the letter? Or could that have been the reason why he didn't send it? 40-odd Junes ago, I wondered about other things, walking down West 18th Street, about to pass the Chelsea post office, through whose door, directly in front of me, stepped John Ashbery. After a mutually startled instant, he inquired mildly, in his celebrated nasal intonation, "What are you doing on my turf?" A reasonable question, since he knew I lived many blocks to the south. Embarrassed, I answered, "You may not believe this, but I'm going to see an astrologer." A visit that Jean, my girlfriend, had arranged as a birthday present. Instead of acerbic admonishment on the imbecility or worse of astrology, he then asked, "It wouldn't be Eleanor Bach, would it?" Stunned, I replied, "As a matter of fact, it would." While I settled into relief, John informed me, "She does a lot of poets," and he mentioned several who were well known, though not personally by me. And then, of course, John himself. And he related how she really impressed him by persisting in a concern that there was something off in his chart, something that didn't add up. Finally, he revealed a personal fact that had been withheld. And she said, "Oh yes, it all makes sense now. Why didn't you tell me before?" So I had been assured by an esteemed literary source that my personal incarnation of the stellar and planetary intricacies would be rendered with astute professional insight. Confidentially, though, and I never told John, I thought that Miss Bach seemed too much concerned with my rising sign, to the neglect of my sun's sign next door, regarding which, and doubtless by the merest wisps of coincident genetic and sociological meanders of fate, I am a first-rate example. And this is the dinner party. The dinner party. Life is a reassuring dream that is vivid but comfortably mundane, said the schmuck aloud to himself as he sat down next to the Schlemiel and indulged in an expansive gesture of certitude, which sent the latter's soup into the lap of the adjacent Schlemazel. The Schmendrick apologized, to no one in particular, and the Schmagegi accepted, while the Schlepp trundled off to the kitchen to get another bowl. And at the front door, the Schnorrer pushed his way past the Schlumps to talk his way in. It was the Putz, of course, that had arranged the seating, which included a decorous melange of schmoes crowded in next to the radiator, sweating and uncomfortable, but grateful to have been invited. I have no idea where I'm supposed to sit, so I leave and go sit in the park. where I hear an avian voice. Hey, you don't recognize me? I'm the pigeon that craps on your windowsill. Why are you down here in the cold when you could be upstairs eating a free meal? What are you, some kind of schnook? Thanks. I think the next poet is Elaine Equi.
Oh, wow. It really is bright. Thank you so much to David Lehman and Terrance Wench for including me in this final issue. I've been a fan of the series from day one, and I'm truly delighted and honored to be in this one. So this is called Lorca's Guitar. I did see Lorca's Guitar. It was in a show at the New York Public Library some years ago of all his papers and all kinds of things. Lorca's Guitar. I saw it on display, the case lined with red velvet, like part of his body, his voice, or the companion of his voice, laid out in an open casket, sealed within a glass box. It was a small instrument, almost a ukulele, this skiff that carried him across the lake of deep song. I stood before it, listened, and heard nothing. No wind in the olive trees, wind in the mountains. I thought it looked homesick, as the poet himself had been homesick in New York. I hope there is a museum guard, some shy boy who comes when no one is around and plays it. Thank you. This next poem, I'm very grateful Mary Jo Salter included it in Best American 2024. It's called Avoidance. And the setup is my husband and I usually have like old TCM type movies on in the background, and invariably one of us falls asleep. So that's the setting. Avoidance. I'm not watching the movie, just looking up from my book now and then, puzzled by the actors whispering urgently as if prompting each other to remember their lines. If only they would recite the words on the page in front of me, I'd be more attentive. Actually, I see I'm doing more than simply not watching. I am actively avoiding the film, like an unpleasant topic disguised in furs and jewels. Something about it offends me. I suppose I could put on a different movie, but you were sleeping so peacefully. I didn't want to risk waking you from the lullaby of this pretentious, dated melodrama. Not only am I busy avoiding the movie, I'm using it as an excuse to avoid continuing to read the book I had started, which, to be honest, isn't so great either. It would seem any activity one chooses might be motivated by the desire to get away from something else. So I have even physically moved to a different room. I can still hear the movie, but faintly, as a kind of spoken music of emotional tones, and without the visuals, it is almost enjoyable. I've also put my book down and have begun writing this poem. Obviously the activity I was avoiding all along, and now can pursue wholeheartedly to the exclusion of everything else. Thank you. So I have two more short ones, but I want to just say a quick, but it's deep and heartfelt thank you to David Lehman for entrusting me with Best American 2023. It was just such a blast. I learned so much. It was life-changing, and I am enormously proud of our collaboration together. It was just one of the best experiences. Okay. So two more short ones. This one is from Best American 2002 that was edited by Robert Creeley, and he's always been a poetry hero of mine, so I was especially excited to have one chosen by him, and it's called O Patriarchy. O Patriarchy, inaccessible and remote behind the drawbridge of the penis. Who knows how your contracts sprang up? Without a word, natural as rain. The institution of you speaks for all man kindly, but if a woman is offended, she finds no one there to blame. Thank you. Okay, and the last one is called Etudes, and usually I don't write poems that rhyme, but in this poem, every line rhymes. Autumn is a solitude. Winter is a fortitude. Spring is an altitude. Summer is an attitude. Summer is a multitude. Autumn is an aptitude. Winter is a quaalude. Spring is a prelude. Spring is a lassitude. Summer is a longitude. Autumn is a gratitude. Winter is an interlude. Winter is a beatitude. Spring is a platitude. Summer is a verisimilitude. Autumn is a semi-nude. And the next reader is Mary Jo Salter.
Well, it's such a pleasure to be reading in between Elaine and David, and among so many wonderful poets. I couldn't agree more. It was the most fun ever to be the guest editor of Best American Poetry 2024. David and I would get into long phone calls, and 2/3 of it was poetry and 1/3 was tennis. So I know you're all missing the US Open right now, and thank you even more for being here. I'm going to read one poem of my own and then a couple of David's. Mine was in the Best American Poetry 2018, and it comes from the fact that I don't hear very well. I'm always mishearing things, and then I get poems out of them. So I heard someone say, as one does, we'll always have Paris, and I heard them say, we'll always have parents. And I thought, that's true. So we'll always have parents. It isn't what he said in Casablanca, and it isn't strictly true. Nonetheless, we'll always have them, much as we have Paris. They're in our baggage, or perhaps our baggage of the old-fashioned type before the wheels, which we remember when we pack for Paris, or don't remember. Paris doesn't know if you're thinking of it. Neither do your parents, although they say you ought to visit more, as if they were as interesting as Paris. Both Paris and your parents are as dead and as alive as what's inside your head. Meanwhile, those lovers, younger every year, because with every rerun we get older, persuade us less for all their cigarettes and shining unshed tears about the joy of Paris blurring in their rearview mirror, that they've surpassed us in sophistication. Granted, they were born before our parents, but don't they seem by now, Bogart and Bergman, like our own children? Think how we could help. We could ban their late nights, keep them home the whole time, and prevent their ill-starred romance. Here's looking at us, kid. You'll thank your parents. Since we're reading from anthologies, introductions, I want to read one paragraph of my own introduction to 2024. One of the best poets writing in this country, David Lehman, has rarely allowed his poems to appear in this series in the 36 years he has overseen it. It's good policy, I think, for poet editors not to choose themselves for publication, but as guest editor, I can't leave out his poem, Ithaca. In fact, these 13 sonnets that first appeared in the Hudson Review are only part of a book-length work which plays upon modern Ithaca, New York, where the poet lives, and the Ithaca of Ulysses. The poem is about the journey of love and marriage, as well as the journey to death, which fortunately takes many detours. Happy is a much repeated word in this poem, and it makes me happy to offer it. So I'm going to read the first two of the 13 sonnets that were in Best American Poetry 2024, and I'd just like to mention that the book, also called Ithaca, will be coming out next year, and it has won a prize. So you need to get both Best American Poetry 2024 and then Ithaca. But it begins with an epigraph from the 16th century French poet Joachim du Bellay, heureux qui comme Ulysse a fait un beau voyage. And that becomes one of the repeated lines. It's a sonnet series. It's not exactly a crown. It has similarities to a villanelle in that two statements recur in different ways. But I'll just read 1 and 2. 1. Happy as Ulysses is he who ventures forth, who leaves behind his idols and his homeland, and mourns the loss of his mariners, shamed like hogs under a witch's spell, or swallowed whole by a one-eyed colossus, and yet he opposes the wind with his beard of sea salt, after one more failure clinging to a spar. And the poor cottage of an October oracle, with leaves burning in the distance of a miracle, absent the flames and amber lights eternal, is as dear to him as the hospital bed he left on the appointed day, walking the whole way, quickening his stride as if he were sprinting like a sandaled youth past the lotus-tempted sailors. 2. What did he believe in? God or nothing, which didn't amount to the same thing. There was love, and there was lovemaking, the stuff of collegiate heartbreak morphed into a porn classic by a French libertine writing under the pen name Tiresias, still thirsty for sacrificial blood in Hades, quizzed by nobody special going to Ithaca. What he wants is to return to the fork in the road 40 years ago. What he gets are directions. You can't miss it. In a soundproof room walled with cork, he hears the song, has no regrets. If he sees her face, he will kiss it. And now I just want to say that Terrance Winch could not have written better about what David Lehman has done. It is absolutely true that there is no one alive who has done more for American poetry. My dear friend, David Lehman.
Oh, how wonderful to hear all these wonderful poets. And I'd like to read a poem by Terrance. There's so many good ones that he's written, and he's been in a number of the volumes of Best American Poetry. I never get to pick the poems that are in the book. The guest editor does the choosing. I can argue with the person. I can champion poems, and sometimes I win. And sometimes I don't. But in the foreword of Best American Poetry 2022, I named some of the poems that were omitted by our guest editor, and one of them that I liked a lot was the title poem of Terrance's last book, or second to last book, which is called That Ship Has Sailed. Great title. In our old life, we ate ice cream and bread pudding. We drank glass after glass of Grand Marnier until it made us sick. Our libido was as big as a billboard. Our libido was larger than a drive-in theater screen in the middle of nowhere, playing endless adolescent pornographic classics. We had an appetite for appetite. We poured melted lard all over our popcorn, which we then covered with a snowstorm of salt. We smoked, we snorted, we cavorted with people who were best left alone. We talked all fucking night on the phone. We read Keats and Yeats and all the greats, day and night. We got into fights in pubs. We drank 16 cups of coffee every day. We called in sick and spent the day in mysteries, doubts, uncertainties. We shirked our responsibilities without a second thought. We ate Chinese food and pizza for breakfast. We rode the bus to visit friends wherever they might be. We stole books. We cheated, we lied, we cried. We danced all night in the living room around the Christmas tree. In our new life, we tried to remember the names of the people we think we might have slept with. We haul the bags of frozen broccoli out of the freezer. We light a candle to commemorate crossing the Great Divide between the green island of the young and the songs in our bones that have come unsung. I love the idea of a bar of poets, and I was thinking as each one read, he was the whiskey sour of poetry. She was the Manhattan of poetry. I am the martini of poetry. Well, as Mary Jo says, a poem of mine was selected for the very first volume in the series by John Ashbery, and I couldn't say no to that. But then after, I did not allow anything of mine to be in a volume for the next 30 years. And although some of the guest editors actually wanted to include me, but the poem that John chose was also chosen by Robert Pinsky for the best of the best that he did. So I'd like to read it. It's called Operation Memory. It was written on June 11th, 1986, when I turned 38 years old. Operation Memory. We were smoking some of this knockout weed when Operation Memory was announced. To his separate bed, each soldier went, counting backwards from 100, with a needle in his arm. And there I was, in the middle of a recession, in the middle of a strange city, between jobs and apartments and wives. Nobody told me the gun was loaded. We'd been drinking since early afternoon. I was loaded. The doctor made me recite my name, rank, and serial number when I woke up sweating in my civvies. All my friends had jobs as professional liars, and most had partners who were good in bed. What did I have? Just this feeling of being always in the middle of things and the luck of looking younger than 50. At dawn, I returned to draft headquarters. I was 18 and counting backwards. The interviewer asked one loaded question after another, such as why I often read the middle of novels, ignoring their beginnings and ends. When had I decided to volunteer for intelligence work? In bed with a broad, I answered with locker room bravado. The truth was, jobs were scarce, and working on Operation Memory was better than no job at all. Unamused, the judge looked at his watch. It was 1970 by the time he spoke. Recommending clemency, he ordered me to go to bed at noon and practice my disappearing act. Someone must have loaded the harmless gun on the wall in Act 1 when I was asleep. And there I was, without an alibi, in the middle of a journey down nameless, snow-covered streets, in the middle of a mystery or a muddle. These were the jobs that saved men's souls, or so I was told. But when the orphans assembled for their annual reunion, 10 years later, on the playing fields of Eton, each unloaded a kit bag full of troubles and smiled bravely and went to bed. Thanks to Operation Memory, each of us woke up in a different bed or coffin with a different partner beside him in the middle of a war that had never been declared. No one had time to load his weapon or see to any of the dozen essential jobs preceding combat duty. And there I was, dodging bullets, merely one in a million whose lucky number had come up. When it happened, I was asleep in bed, and when I woke up, it was over. I was 38, on the brink of middle age, a succession of stupid jobs behind me, a loaded gun on my lap. That was a sestina. So if you heard some of the words repeated, that's why. So I will read just two excerpts more from various forwards. This is from the Best American Poetry 2020. And just as we were going to bed with the book, the pandemic happened. So at the very last minute, during copy editing, we got to add a paragraph, the guest editor and I got to add a couple of paragraphs. This was the conclusion of the foreword. Confined to quarters, I have the luxury of thinking about this plague in relation to those in our literature and history. The 10 plagues God visited upon the Egyptians in Exodus, the plague Oedipus brought on Thebes when he committed the twin sins of parricide and incest, the bubonic plague that decimated Europe in the 14th century. It is possible to regard the current situation allegorically as a punishment we have brought upon ourselves, or possibly as a prophecy of geopolitical warfare, or even a radical solution to the problem Malthus posed. Whatever else it is, the disaster is also a failure of the imagination, inasmuch as we were as unprepared for it as we were at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The reassuring thing is that we did win the war that we entered on that day. In the aftermath of the terrorist attack of September 11, 2001, W.H. Auden's September 1, 1939, gained a new currency. The most famous line in that poem, "We must love one another or die," was brutalized in an opinion piece in today's New York Times, March 19, 2020, which substituted help and assist for love. The more important point is that Auden's poetry endures. Poetry matters. People instinctively turn to poetry during a crisis, for it is then that we become most acutely aware of our need for beauty, wisdom, consolation, charm, and delight. American poets are and will be living through a crisis worse than any in my lifetime, and how they respond to it will prove a fascinating test and challenge. And in 2024, I wrote, in 1988, when this series began, the internet did not exist. The Berlin Wall had not yet come down. The words of the day were glasnost, perestroika, and leveraged buyout. No one had heard of the dot-com bubble, the iPhone, the selfie, the cloud, or Taylor Swift. Some people, not many, had heard of the maverick American inventor, Nikola Tesla. Time and Newsweek were still important, but the press was more interested in Donna Rice and monkey business than in Gary Hart's foreign policy ideas, and evidence of plagiarism wiped out Joe Biden's campaign for the presidency. Though the crash of October 1987 was still on people's minds, Money remained the caffeine of the ambitious. Oliver Stone's Wall Street opened with the Twin Towers rising majestically, while Frank Sinatra sang, "Fly me to the moon." While it remains for others to decide whether the poetry we publish today measures up to that which we perpetuated in our first years, we have done our best to represent the paths poets take when they face a fork. The many paths where triumph rang its brassy phrase or love whispered a little out of tenderness. This is the 37th volume in the series, and if a young academic looking for a thesis subject loves poetry, one could do worse than considering a shelf of the best American poetry from its origin to the present. We have proved that a book of poetry can matter in the life of a young poet, that poetry can pay for itself, that its publication need not depend on subsidies or grants, that a concerted effort to single out the best poems of the year can result in an annual Rite of Autumn, and that our leading poets have, with generosity and acumen, surveyed the scene and left a record of their predilections. And with that, I would like to thank the poets who appeared today and whose work we are very happy to include in the last and latest volume of Best American Poetry. To thank the audience, you whom I cannot see, but can behold with great pleasure, and to our sponsors at the Y. And may I wish you all a very good evening, and my heart rests with Novak Djokovic. Good night.